Hello, everyone. This is a kind of a foray into the time of right now and Shavuot Chag HaBikurim, the Feast of Weeks. And why don't we? I just want to make sure that everything is clear here. I'll put my volume up. Everybody can hear me? Good. Okay. We'll start. Zvahi Bayom Hashlishi Biyot HaBoker Vayihi Kolot Uverakim Ve'anan Kaved Al Hahar V'kol Shofar Chazak Me'od Vayecherad Kol Ha'am Asher B'machaneh. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, as well as a thick cloud on the mountain, and a blast of a trumpet so loud that all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses brought the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, for the Lord has descended upon it in fire. The smoke went up like the smoke of a kiln, while the whole mountain trembled violently as the blast of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Moses would speak and God would answer him in thunder. When the Lord descended upon Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain, the Lord summoned Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Shavuot, from the Hebrew word weeks, as 7 weeks, is the holiday where Jews celebrate the day that the Torah was received at Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, and it is one of the 3 major pilgrimage festivals in our calendar, along with Pesach, Passover, and Sukkot. This is where the Jews would go to visit and bring offerings at the temple in Jerusalem 3 times a year. Shavuot, however, falls exactly 7 weeks after the start of Pesach, hence the name. Shavua, it means week. Shavuot is the plural of week. That's all it means, weeks after. So in a certain sense, I would say it's kind of like a stepsister to Pesach. You know, Pesach has all of the the Seder and all those melodies, but I will show you, we will try to explore the melodies that Shavuot offers us. So the holiday is marked by a sfirah. Sfirah means counting, a counting of each night, which precedes the day after, starting on the second night of Passover and the night before Shavuot begins. Ki Adonai Elohecha meviacha el eretz tova. Nachale eretz nachale mayim ayanot utehomot yotzim babik'a uvahar. Eretz chita useora the Geffen ute'ena v'rimon eretz zayit shemen udavash. Zayit shemen udavash. And what that means, for the Lord your God is bringing you to a good land, a land with streams and springs and fountains issuing from plain and hill, a land of wheat, barley, of vines, figs and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and date honey. Pomegranate, a very beautiful and majestic fruit. It even has a crown. Pomegranates were usually eaten fresh, although occasionally they were used to make juice or wine, or sun-dried for use when the fresh fruit was out of the season. Wheat. The ancient Israelites cultivated both wheat and barley. These two grains are mentioned first in the biblical list of the 7 species of the land of Israel, and their importance as food in ancient Israelite cuisine is seen as a celebration at the barley harvest at the festival of Shavuot. Barley was the most important grain during the biblical period. This was recognized ritually on the 2nd day of Passover in the Omer offering, consisting of barley flour from the newly ripened crop. Figs were cultivated throughout the land of Israel, and fresh or dried figs were part of the daily diet. A common way of preparing dried figs was to chop them and press them into a cake. Olives. The olives are a major element in the 7 species. Olive oil was not only used for food and for cooking, but for lighting sacrificial offerings and for cooking, but also anointing the priests and kings. The olive tree and its oil have been major components in the cultural and rituals of ancient Israel. Dates, a fruit that is mentioned in the stories of Moses, David, and Tamar, whose branches provided food, shelter, and sustenance for our people for so many years, and was the recognized symbol of the kingdom of Judah. Some of the oldest cultivated fruits. Several accounts in the Torah also indicate that bee honey existed in ancient Israel, the story of Samson pulling the beehive. But most of the honey consumed in ancient Israel was fruit honey extracted from dates and grapes. The land flowing with milk and honey refers to date honey. And for grapes, it's a land where grapes grew in large clusters as reported by the expedition of the Hebrew spies into Canaan. These grape clusters were so large that they carried them on a stick between 2 men. There are pictures of that. This gift from God was meant to be enjoyed, and men were not to go to war until they tasted of their own grape harvest. Essentially, Shavuot helped to reinstate the agricultural focus of the land while emphasizing the return to our ancient homeland, where this commandment could be fulfilled, obviously without the Holy Temple in Jerusalem now, but that we can go to Jerusalem. It's a beautiful experience for those of you who've been to Israel to be in Jerusalem, specifically that city, on one of these 3 Shalosh Regalim festivals. So this harvest is connected with so many aspects of Jewish history, from the laws of what is called Shemitah, which is the 7-year cycle of the land, to the story of Ruth. She was, in the fields, to the renewal of agricultural settlements in the land of Israel in the 20th century by the kibbutzim and moshav cooperatives. The story, it's a fascinating story of Shavuot in the 20th century, takes on added meaning when Jews, mostly from Eastern Europe, started to settle in Israel and establish agricultural communities in the early part of the 20th century. Suddenly, Jews were once again tilling the land and reaping wheat in the summer in Eretz Yisrael. In the kibbutz movement, Shavuot was resurrected as an agricultural holiday. The agricultural produce was presented with jubilant processions featuring singing and dancing. And this is a part of Shavuot in Eretz Yisrael. This first example is called Lakotzrim Hidad, which is harvest cheers. A mountain wreath is adorned with dawn, valleys flattened it. To her voice, the mountain surprises at dawn, we come to see her. The reaper echoed and replied, come on, come in. Sing to me, daughter. Do you notice this has some connections with the story of Ruth, this poem? To the reaper, he answers, sing, please sing. The sickle in the hand, dance, reapers, cheers. The sound of the harvest is a song that you have sung. It's a golden rose. and let us, and it's a golden scroll. Let's just listen. It's a beautiful short song, beautiful. And this is only one of hundreds of songs that was written for the kibbutz, and specifically the kibbutz movement, because it was a socialist movement, and people, the idea was to be together, help each other, grow together, and that kind of thing. I want to give you a couple more examples of this. The next piece is called Shibolet Basadeh, which is a song that is always sung on Shavuot. The general text is, ear of grain in the field, bowed in the wind from the weight of its seed, which is great. And in the expanse of the mountain, the day already rises, the sun is fine gold. Let's see if we can move on here. Technically, I did. Okay, and this is a beautiful duet. You have the translation beside this. It's not a long piece. Shibolet Basadeh, an ear of grain in the field, and that is what Shavuot is about.
שיבולת בשדה קוראה ברוח בעומס גרעינים קירה ובמרחב הרים יום כבר יפוח השמש קדם וזהב אורו אוי אורו שורו בין כפרים כמה הם בשלה כבר על פני הכרים קצרו שלחו מגל בו את ראשית הקציר את ראשית הקציר שדה שעורים כמה זרחה עודרת שפע יבול וברכה לקראת בו הקוצרים זוהר מצהרת חרש לעומר מחכה אבו הניפו נירו לכם ניר חדלה כמה את ראשית הקציר קצרו שלחו מגל בו את ראשית הקציר שיבולת בשדה קוראה ברוח בעומס גרעינים קירה ובמרחב הרים יום כבר יפוח השמש קדם וזהב אורו אוי אורו שורו בין כפרים כמה הם בשלה כבר על פני הכרים קצרו שלחו מגל בו את ראשית הקציר את ראשית הקציר את ראשית הקציר.
Another example, you notice these songs not only express love of the land, but they are meant to dance to. They are meant to dance to. And in Israel, yes, Shavuot is a liturgical holiday for sure. But the whole kibbutz movement was not that liturgical. And the idea was to be Jews, not necessarily through observance from the liturgical point of view only, but they wanted to be alive and till the land and make things work. Max Helfman, I believe, was born in 1900. He definitely passed away in 1963. Was born in Radzin, Poland, where his father was a local teacher and a cantor, in whose choir he sang as a child. Which means the kids that sing in a choir, and I'm not making a joke, most of those kids have some kind of connection with synagogue, and they come back after. It's what it is. So he arrives in America at the age of 8, very young. And then he becomes very soon after a boy solo at the age of 8 or 9 in New York Orthodox synagogue choirs. Okay, so his choral He becomes a composer, and he writes a ton of music, a ton of liturgical music, and then he wrote this piece called Hag HaBikurim, which means technically, or actually, the festival. Hag HaBikurim are first fruits, so that's when the fruits are, you can pick them at first. Okay, so is a kind of a suite of original compositions and arrangements of modern Hebrew songs that were sung in Palestine during the decades prior to independence, and as well as the early years of the state of Israel, by the Jewish colonists and pioneers, Halutzim, who, imbued with Zionist ideals and national return and reconstruction, had gone there to reclaim, rebuild, and resettle, as I mentioned before, resettle the land as a Jewish national home. These songs, which represented a kind of a new Zionist-oriented spirit of rejuvenation and agriculturalism revival, and also provided a kind of a link to Jewish antiquity, were created or adopted for the most part by songwriters and composers and poets who were active in the Yishuv, which is the Jewish communal settlement in Palestine before it became Israel under the British mandate. Now, this next piece is called Chag HaBikurim. It's part of that suite that Helfman writes. And the piece is called Atze Zeitim Omdim. You may have sung this. I have a hunch that some of you know this piece. It's a children's song. And basically it means olive trees rise. And you hopefully you'll know this song. A beautiful arrangement, beautiful. By the way, conducted by Neil Levin, who was one of the teachers that I revere. And I want to give you one more. This is partially because I had such a good experience working with this song, working with the person who sang this. This is a piece called Sisi Admat HaSharon. And again, let me just, well, there it is. There's the text. Why don't we move on? You can watch the text while the piece moves. It's not a very long piece, as are the other ones. This is also a kind of a dance piece with a tremendous amount of energy, sung by the great, I believe, Idare Kahana. Now let's see what we get. Here we go. Sisi Admat HaSharon. And so all this started when in the Canaanite Bronze period, they had festivals that had to do with agricultural settlement and that kind of thing. But obviously, they were eliminated over the hundreds of years that was in that time, um, and all it started to change in the 7th and 8th centuries BCE when the Jerusalem monarchs and priesthood took power, bringing formally separate tribes under the helm of one ruler, a king. And as part of this program, they co-opted those local affairs and supplanted them by unified rites that could only be performed in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. So this program would create a sense of peoplehood, of nationality for the people of the land, for the Jewish people of the land, and enrich the pots of both palace and temple. That's just how it was. So Shavuot is referenced as one of the 3 pilgrimage, or it's called Shalosh Regalim, Shloshet HaRegalim in terms of the plural, in the book of Shemot in Exodus. But in its early stages, Shavuot was a sister celebration to Passover, as I mentioned, a kind of a stepsister. The first of these 2 major agricultural holidays was Passover. Actually, the first agricultural holiday was not Passover, it was Shavuot. And then over the course of the summer until Sukkot. And that's another major agricultural holiday. What marks the difference between Passover and Shavuot is the counting of the Omer, as was referenced before. There are 49 days, which is 7 weeks. This is a calendar, an actual Omer calendar, very old, but that's the art is, as far as I'm concerned, absolutely incredible. So that 49-day period, 50-day period of the Omer, which is between the harvest of barley, Passover, and the harvest of wheat, Sukkot. And it involves that same pattern, in this case, with a 7-day period from the first day of, Sukkot to Shmini Atzeret, meaning Shmini, 7 days of Atzeret, days of gathering. Okay, so the Omer is an Atzeret too, where people gathered to count the Omer. The other Atzeret is Shmini Atzeret, those 7 days between the Sukkot, the first night, and the 7th day of Sukkot. So by the way, the concept of counting each day of the Omer kind of represents a kind of a spiritual preparation and anticipation for the giving of the Torah. And I reference back to our opening sequence when we heard the thunder. It's frightening. It should be awe-inspiring. So if we look at the Omer as a preparation period between Pesach and receiving the Torah, it's a really very meaningful time of the year. I would like to say a couple of other things. No, actually, let's just play this. This is a short piece, another a piece of modern day, the early 20th century Israel. This is about the Omer. That's what we'll talk about. We'll talk about the Omer right now. And they're celebrating the Omer, the grains, and they'll combine everything, all their work, because they're the chosen people.
Omer, Omer, de boa, hadasha, Omer, Omer, de boa.
Also another dance piece. Everything was dance in those years. Um, um, I want to play one other piece, Lamid Bar Sa'enu, To the Desert We Go. And for me, this is a song that is sung on Shavuot, not in terms of its liturgy, but as a folk song, and it represents the going to the desert after they cross the Sea of Reeds, to those 40 years of looking, finding, and then they end up at Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments. But the idea to go to the desert because it meant freedom. Okay, so we have another culture. This is totally a Sephardic example. You'll recognize the melody probably, maybe, and it's a wonderful singer, Yardena Arazi. Now, I'll tell you, if you want to know what a serious musician is like, you watch those musicians play. Not a smile on their face will get this gig done. It was really fun to watch, actually. So that is obviously a Sephardic. That's not a Western take on things. So I just want to check what's next. Okay. By the way, on this day, the statement, on Shavuot, the children of Israel are transformed into a living, breathing nation on their journey to the one land they will forever be able to call home. Now, Shavuot on occasion coincides with the historical date of the Declaration of Israel's independence, when they signed it. When it does, it gives us a chance to reflect on how the two are connected, and they are connected. Shavuot celebrates the first barley harvest and also the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, the moment when Israel accepted all of God's commandments. And there are several biblical texts read on this holiday, and that's what I want to talk about now. I'm going to move on. I hope there we go. The Torah portions for Shavuot. They obviously in Galut, in the you call exile, whatever, not in Israel. There are 2 days of Shavuot. In Israel, it's one day because they need that second day to celebrate. And there's a lot of celebrations. There's water fights in the streets. That's a what do you call a tradition? Water fights. You dress in white. Or the kids have tons of stuff to do. I mean, I remember when I went to school there. This is before, I'm sure before most of you were born. I really I enjoyed that holiday so much as a child. So the Torah reading for the first day, if we can look, Moses, day one in the circle, Moses ascends the mountain to receive the Ten Commandments. God descends to the top of the mountain amidst big thunder and lightning, smoke, and the blast of the shofar. By the way, if you were here at the beginning of this lecture, the first thing that we did with the thunder is exactly this text. And then day one in the Haftarah, its parallel is recounting Ezekiel's ecstatic vision of this divine chariot, which is brilliant, burning, surreal vehicle. Just as Israel came close to catching a glimpse of the divine at Sinai, Ezekiel comes close to seeing God in this iconic vision. Now, that is what we do on Shabbat. We do a Torah reading, and the question is, why a certain Haftarah reading? Because it adds a lesson onto the reading that we do onto the Torah reading, which is the Torah reading is the center. The Haftarah adds another layer onto what we're trying to learn. Day two is a little different. Again, day two is not in Israel, but day two in the United States and all over the world, other than Israel, gives detailed laws for the three pilgrimage festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And day two, as a Haftarah, the prophet's vision of God to overthrow Israel's enemy, another vision of the divine that is reminiscent back to day one of their encounter at Sinai. So in a certain sense, the Haftarah and day two might have on some levels more to do with day one than day two Torah reading. But anyway, that's just that when it's coming up, okay? Having said that, I'm sorry for that. Okay. Okay, so, and when the Torah is taken out of the ark on Shavuot, as well as on Shabbat for sure, the text Vayehi bin Soa Ha'aron takes on great import. The receiving of the Torah, meaning it adds meaning and beauty as it does in the Western Ashkenazic communities. We've talked about Solomon Zulster. We don't have time today, but we will listen to the short Vayehi bin Soa Ha'aron. Makes me proud to be Jewish. So beautiful, that music. And it's that combined with all the other music that we heard. We have so much to look forward to this holiday. The next section begins now. 1,000 years ago, there were poet cantors, rabbis living in the Jewish communities of the Rhine Valley in Germany, and they composed soaring piyutim, which are piyutim are liturgical poetry. It's not prayers, not part of the Amidah, but they're poetry that add on to the beauty of the prayers. A handful of these piyutim becomes staples in the Ashkenazic liturgy. Kol Nidre, a piyut. There are others right now. This is one of them that I'm going to talk about. Rabbi Meir ben Yitzchak, who was a shliach tzibur, agent of the congregation, was a real giant among these poets. He was recognized by his contemporaries for his scholarship and as a very pious and artistic, because he wrote poetry, a human being. He was active in Worms in the latter half of the 11th century, so it's almost 1,000 years ago. Or wait a minute, it is 1,000 years ago. That's right. Oh my God, I'm older than I think. And he was active when the Crusades were happening. So it was very dangerous times. So he writes this piece called Akdamut Milin, and this is it's Akdamut Milin means an introduction of words and a beginning of speech. And this is done, there are a couple of traditions, but one was before the first Aliyah, and then one was, I believe, after the first Aliyah, before the blessing for the second, or after the blessing. There are a couple of ways to do it. So it takes a long time for this to become into our liturgy, but it first appears in the liturgy around the first decade of the 15th century. So we're talking 400 years later. And the first Siddur that contained this poem is in 1557. And I wish I thought I did, but I don't have the text for you. So we'll deal, and I will give you an example of what it sounds like, because this is a very, very famous tune that some of you who've gone to shul on Shavuot, we do snippets of it. Okay, goes like this. Akdamut milin v'sharayut shuta havla shakelna harman urshuta bevavei terei utalat de'eftach b'nakshota bevarei devarei v'tarei adei lekadish Shuta, etc. What it means, before reading the Ten Commandments, I first asked permission and approval to start with 2 or 3 stanzas in fear of God, who creates and ever sustains. He has endless might, not to be described. Were the skies parchment, were all the reeds quills, were the seas and waters made of ink, were all the world's inhabitants made scribes, the glorious God of heaven and earth alone formed the world, veiled in mystery. Without exertion did he perfect it. Only by a light sign, without substance, he accomplished all this work in 6 days, and his glory ascended in a throne of fire. It's gorgeous. I mean, absolutely gorgeous poetry. And this is a example of some of it. They include the 10 Commandments in this, because this is not only Akdamut, but this is the Zamir Choir of Boston. They do a very good job on this. This is a piece written by Josh Jacobson, based on some of that trope. You'll hear it. Akdamut. By the way, I have to stop. You see the letters Taf Aleph at the end of every single line? Taf is the last letter of the alphabet. Aleph is the beginning. So God ends and beginnings. It's a circular thing. And this is part of the poetry and part of the acrostic and everything. I'm sorry for stopping. We continue. And so what the composer is trying to do here is to create a scenario where the people at the foot of the mountain are a mass. And so technically he has each singer starting at a different point with the same music. And so it sounds, to some mysterious, to some it sounds dissonant, but dissonance is okay in this situation. I think he does a very good job making that. One last thing about this Akdamut, um, the Machzor, do I have it? I don't have it with me, but the Machzor for Shavuot, the one I study from, is about 800 pages long. And it has much more poetry than what we have in our modern Siddurim. So, and many of those poems have really historical tunes to them that are lost because we have not used the poems. I mean, it would be, something that should think about in terms of maybe rescuing some of those tunes. They're beautiful tunes. Um, the conclusion about Akdamut is that Shavuot is a revelation of sorts. It's a revelation of receiving the Ten Commandments. And the Piyut Akdamut Milin, which is what we just heard, illuminates that the Torah is complicated. In the language of this Piyut, it's very archaic. It's not Hebrew, it's Aramaic. But for some reason, this poem lasted, centuries passed. This poem became more obscure, less explainable, because it's very complicated, and at that time they had a different kind of way of teaching. In the end, this poem is probably more than words, more than prayer, more than music, more than memory, but somewhat of a delicate, enduring fabric, just taking everything from all those disciplines. So that's Akdamut Milin. Here is, instead of Akdamut, in the Mediterranean and Yemenite traditions, and we're talking Sephardic, I would rather say Yemenite and Mediterranean, read one of several versions of Ketuvah, which is a marriage contract between Israel and God, modeled on the traditional format from a Jewish bride and groom. It generally includes prophetic verses alluding to the covenant between God and Israel, and it substitutes the gifts between God and Israel, like Torah, Tefillin, Talit, Shabbat, festivals, and all that stuff, for what a bride and groom normally promise each other, and lists God and Moses, or heaven and earth, as witnesses. Now, this is again, Yemenite and Mediterranean tradition. This is not an Ashkenazic tradition. It starts from the year of creation, which is 0, and it's a special group of piyutim. We said piyutim was poems. They're not part of the actual prayer thing, but they're poems, religious poems, and these poems summarize the 613 commandments. It's long, in rhymed form. It's called azharot, which are warnings. That's the title. Okay, warning. Because the numerical value of that word is 613. They were composed by one of the great medieval poets, Shlomo ibn Gabriel, lived 1021 to 1055. He was very young when he passed. And it was the golden age of Spain. Jews were doing much then. Sephardic and Oriental congregations that include the poem in their Musaf or Mincha afternoon services concentrate on the 248 positive commandments, and on the first day, and on the second day, the 365 negative commandments. The sad part of this is that it's usually done during the Mincha service. Not too many people are there, but it's an incredibly beautiful poem. If I could just play a minute of that, it's a little different than the Western stuff, the Western style, excuse me.
איזה מקום בינה מזה וזהו אוצר חוכמת ועדת ראשית קניינהו בואי לשאול היום את מי נועץ ויבינהו, מי ייתן ידעתי ואמצאהו, גובה שמיים ממעונותם, قلته على
It's a very different way of making gestures, making phrases, and it's not tonal in the way that Western music is. We can talk about that another time. We're going to go on to the book of Ruth right now. Ruth is a book of 4 chapters read in the morning services of Shavuot on the second day for those observing 2 days, generally on the second day. The heroine is a Moabite woman, not Jewish initially, married to an Israelite man who dies suddenly. Rather than return to her Moabite family, she follows her Jewish mother-in-law, Naomi, back to Bethlehem. Her declaration to Naomi is beautiful. It's just beautiful, moving. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts me from you. That's chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. So we read Ruth for a few reasons. Number one, Ruth pledges a kind of a fidelity to Naomi and the Israelite God. And that mirrors the fidelity that Israel expresses to God receiving the Torah. They're there. They're at the foot of the mountain. Secondly, Ruth's story takes place during the season of the barley harvest. Remember that it's a 2-pronged holiday. It's the the 10 Commandments and Torah and the agricultural part. Finally, Ruth is said to be the great-great-grandmother of David HaMelech, King David, who is thought to have been born, and died on Shavuot. If I can give you a little of this, let's see here. Yeah, a little of this. I have the sentences here, and so you can read the English when I'm doing the Hebrew. בימי שפוט השופטים ויהי רעב בארץ וילך איש מבית לחם יהודה לגור בשדה מואב הוא ואשתו ושני בניו ושם האיש אלימלך ושם אשתו נעמי ושם שני בניו מחלון וכיליון אפרתים מבית לחם יהודה ויבואו שדה מואב ויהיו שם וימות אלימלך איש נעמי ותישאר היא ושני בניה ויישאו להם נשים מאביות שם אחת עורפה ושם השנית רות וישבו שם כ10 שנים וימותו גם שניהם מחלון וכיליון ותישאר האישה משני ילדיה ומאישה ותקם היא וכלותיה ותשב משדה מואב כי שמע בשדה מואב, כי פקד אדוני את עמו לתת להם לחם. ותצא מן המקום אשר הייתה שמה, ושתי חלותיה עמה, ותלכנה בדרך לשוב אל ארץ יהודה. Now I put the ending of the chapter on that last sentence, but it goes on for more sentences, but that gives you a hint of what the melody sounds like. It's a gorgeous trope, and for me, I think for most people, they would say that's the most beautiful, not necessarily the way I sang it, but the most beautiful trope in our liturgy. Really beautiful, so heartfelt. I want to now play. We're moving on. We're moving on. I want to play now this wonderful Megillat Ruth by a friend of mine, Chazan Daniel Halfon. He's from Israel, just a wonderful cantor, and he kind of does it's a Oriental Mediterranean different melody that he uses for Ruth, and he harmonizes it. It's fabulous. It's a minute, very short.
והנה בועז בא מבית לחם, ויאמר לקוצרים, אדוני עמכם, ויאמר לו, יברכך אדוני. ויהי בימי שפוט השופטים, ויהי רעב בארץ, וילך איש מבית לחם יהודה לגור בשדה מואב, ואשתו ושני בניו. ישלם אדוני ההולך ותהי משכורתך שלמה מעם אדוני אלוהי ישראל אשר באת לחסות
A wonderful musician and a sweet, sweet man. I'm always happy to have him. We've had him sing a couple times earlier on different things, but wonderful. This is it's a song. It's about 3 minutes long. It's a piece called Ruth, the story of Ruth, and this is Nurit Hirsch, who some of you know her name. She writes Ohose Shalom Bimromav, right? That's the Nurit Hirsch, and she's one of the great. She and Naomi Shemer are probably the two great composers of. There are others, obviously, but they're certainly come up in my mind as at the top. So this is Ruth. It's a beautiful melody and sung. Do I have who sang it? I don't think I wrote that down, but it's a wonderful singer. This is Ruth. Enjoy. It's a beautiful song, beautiful melody.
את עמה וביתה עזבה בעקבות צו לבבה, בעקבות צו לבבה. אל עם זרים נעמי הלכה, וגורל שזרה, וגורל שזרה. אל תפגעי בי לעוזבך, לשוב מאחרייך, כי באשר תלכי אלך בעקבותייך. אל תפגעי בי לעוזבך, לשוב מאחרייך, כי באשר תלכי אלך בעקבותייך. השדות רוחות, שיבולים אז תצא ללקוט. שיבולים אז תצא ללקוט. המואביה בשדות בועז, כי היה לבבה כועז, כי היה לבבה כועז. אל תפגעי בי לעוזבך, לשוב מאחרייך, כי באשר תלכי אלך, אלך בעקבותייך. אל נא תפגעי בי לעוזבך, לשוב מאחרייך, כי באשר תלכי אלך, אלך בעקבותייך. את עמה וביתה עזבה, בעקבות צו לבבה, בעקבות צו לבבה. המלוכה לה ניתנה כשי, את דוד בן ישי, את דוד בן ישי. אל תפגעי בי לעוזבך, לשוב מאחרייך, כי באשר תלכי אלך, אלך בעקבותייך. אל נא תפגעי בי לעוזבך, לשוב מאחרייך, כי באשר תלכי אלך, אלך
I think that's a beautiful, beautiful melody. And we are nearing the somewhat of the conclusion of our lecture, just to let you know, but probably another 15 minutes. There is food, so I want you to stay for that, certainly. And now we go to, I want to talk about something else, and that is just a little something about the Hasidic tradition. And this is a very different tradition, where a lot of others, non-Hasidim, want to do things very seriously and according to the law and everything else. The Hasidim, and I say this with a tremendous amount of love for their traditions, want to celebrate. Everything is about the ecstasy of the moment. This is, a philosopher, Martin Buber, certainly wrote some wonderful, wonderful collection of stories about the Hasidim that I would recommend anyone to read. It's really great stuff. In English, by the way. I mean, I wrote it in Hebrew and Yiddish, but it is in English. So, and German. So that's the idea of the Hasidic tradition. The next piece I want to play will illustrate that. This piece is called Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, Morasha Kehilat Yaakov. So Moses, the Torah that is ordained, that Moses wants to give us, he wants to give to the Kehilat, the congregation of Yaakov, the children of Israel. That's what Moses intends the Torah to be read, who Moses intends the Torah to be read by. Listen to this. This is a great example of that ecstatic. By the way, the melody repeats and repeats, and there's a kind of like another kind of a dance kind of feel to the thing as we had in the first part of our lecture chat. Okay, and that gives you an example of that absolute celebratory spirit that is in the Hasidic the soul. I want to play one more example. This is definitely a piece done also on Shavuot, Tavu Hortanu, and this is incited by Rabbi Schneerson, those of blessed memory. Some of you who know who he was. He was a really good scholar, and I believe he was born in Paris. He got a degree in some medical thing, and here he is telling his crowd to sing as loud as they can, and he gets pretty much involved in it. And here we go. Atav Chotanu, Rabbi Schneerson. Maybe at the end he says enough already. So, but it gives you an example, again, another example of a community celebrating a holiday that might have different rhythms than we do, but certainly I love the differences between all the communities. It's something very spectacular about our liturgy. Among Sephardic Jews, we're almost complete. We have one more piece to play. Among Sephardic Jews, there are many additional traditions that lead to this, the wonder and joy of this holiday. Custom is staying up all night, as we do, to study selections of Torah and Zohar, which is called velada, from the Ladino word meaning to guard or watch. There is obviously that dairy meal that we haven't talked about yet, but I will show you a little of that. Borekas and other favorites. In many Sephardic congregations, Ruth is also read, preceded by the Azharot, as we talked about, not the Akdamut, but the Azharot. Excuse me. In a recently translated and published Ladino language memoir, here is a little quotation. My father was an observant Jew. One Shavuot Eve, he went after dinner to a study session according to the custom of the Jews when they went to their synagogues, and no one stayed home. That time of the year's nights were shorter. Dawn broke around 6:30. Some people would come back home to eat the cheese pies with some rice pudding and then go to sleep until 1 or 2 p.m. Others went touring into the parks, while lower class people with wicker baskets filled with cheese pies, rice pudding, raki, and hard-boiled eggs went with their families to parks in the outskirts of the city to eat, get drunk, and fall asleep in the grass. Most of them returned home sick. This is a description of Shavuot. Amazing. So again, here's just another poem, if I can, by another Sephardic gentleman. Best Sinar is a large garden. One can walk for miles and never see its eternity. On Shavuot, we sit under the tree with the wife and the children. We bring baskets filled with food, without forgetting the rice pudding dessert and the Nahamias Uzo. By the way, the Gulf of Salonika is clear like crystal. We take a dip in the sea. Let us drink to the death of Daniel Amar. et cetera, et cetera. So I would like to play one. We have more music, but for those of you, I want to play one last piece that I really want to play, and this is called Ashrehem Yisrael. It's a beautiful piece, and it's from the, ready for this, the Persian tradition. We're going to go all over the Persian tradition. A wonderful singer. Let's just listen. It's not that long of a piece. The Persian tradition.
دشمنت سازن تباهی عشرخم 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 إسرائيل زخوت تورای موشه زخوت جمع خبری بر ما رسان به سورا از آمدن یشوع عشره از چشمه های یشوع آب حیاتی برآری بر ما رسان به سورا از آمدن یشوع عشر
And so we end the lecture with the same thunder and lightning that started it. But before we go, we can partake of a little artichoke pasta, some cheese blintzes, a challah for Shavuot in the shape of a flower. That's a tradition. And on the bottom, let's see, what is that? Oh, yeah, some mushroom tortellini with yogurt. Or on the bottom left, vegetable quiche. And when we're done with that, I think what I'll offer are all these rather interesting cheese pies and grapes and cheeses and breads and a little liqueur to wash it all down. What I'd like to do, for those of you who want to stay, here's a very short piece. This is absolutely a Shavuot song, Salenu al Ktafenu. This is a beautiful piece. The Zamir Choir, again, of Boston.
Come celebrate our harvest, come see the
I want to end with, well, we could do Hakotri. I want to end with this last piece. I think you may have seen it before. It is a piece called Agada. And the reason why I want to end it with it, it is a beautiful song. Number one, it's part of that Chalutz movement that we talked about. And it talks about a little boy who was alone, but with Elijah the prophet on the banks of the Galil, studying our traditions. And that is what Shavuot is all about. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the week. Let me just do one thing before I sign off, and that will be to stop the share.
It's fascinating, Joseph.
Everybody.
That was Gideon, wasn't it?
I'm sorry?
That
Interesting.
was Gideon singing, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yep.
Joseph, it was fascinating.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well done, Joseph.
Thanks. Thanks.
Excellent.
Thank you,
Beautiful.
everybody.
Go back.
Glad I heard this.
Thank you, Joseph.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cantor Ness.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Shavuot Tov.
Shavuot Tov.
Shavuot Tov.
Shavuot Tov.
Until next time.
Adios.